think the nice thing about event photography is it is kind of what you make it and how you see it. Event photography can be everything from what Troy does, which is weddings, to what I do, which is more the live music stuff. But I also do, as an example, for the arena that I photograph for, there are times that they want me to just walk around the concourse of the arena and take pictures of people at the bar, or take pictures of people waiting in line for concessions, or posing with a mascot, or photographs of their VIP room. There's times when I was a photographer for a casino here a couple of years ago, where they would invite me to special events that they did, where they'd have special poker games between the Ducks and the Kings. They'd want me to photograph that as it happened, but it's more impromptu and on the fly. So that's kind of my starting point for event photography. What do you consider it, Troy?
Yeah, everything you said makes perfect sense, and pretty much anything that you don't have a lot of control over. You know, a portrait session,
Right.
you have control over, you have guidance and things like that. You can tell people what to wear. Events for me in the wedding industry is usually the ceremonies and things that I really don't have any input in. That I have to be prepared and make that lighting work. You gotta know your gear, but that's the event. The whole day is an event for sure. Concerts, funerals, weddings, things like that, where we really don't have full control over the day.
It's kind of when you are capturing something that unfolds in front of you. But the difference between, and we'll get into the overlap of it with photojournalism in a little bit, but the key difference in event photography and photojournalism is in both of them, you're capturing what's happening in front of you. In event photography, you can become involved if you need to. So you can actually ask for or try and make things happen at times. You know, as a good example, this would be that one. That's me on a stage, and I'm photographing a band member that is super far away from me. But at any given point in time, they can be right in your face. It's just things that can happen on the fly as you're doing things, and you got to be prepared. And the other thing about event photography is there are times that it can be rather uncontrolled. So this is a photo pit at a concert. Specifically, I think this was Korn at Glen Helen, San Manuel Amphitheater. And you can kind of see, I'm going to try and mark it on here, but you can kind of see right about here, those people's hands are hanging over the barricade that separates them from security. So this area between them and the stage, did Troy just drop out?
No, I spotlit you.
Oh, okay. With their arms there, from them to the stage is the security area that security walks around to catch crowd surfers, etc. All the way down that line is them. Everybody else in the middle, in between those are all photographers that are in that photo pit. They're all trying to get the exact same shot, but hopefully moving around at the time. And that's kind of how I see event photography. It's a run and gun type situation most of the time, not always. We'll kind of get into the more portrait side, which I do in event photography too as well. Troy, do you got any shots you want to show?
No, later. We'll jump into that later. Yeah, I don't.
Well,
really
in that case, let me show these then, because this is a good example also of event photography for me. I'm photographing for San Manuel Casino. One of the things I had to do was photograph the meet and greets. So either before or after the show, the artist would pose in front of this step and repeat background with tribe members. And I would always take the pictures with the tribe members. That's what I was there for. But I would always make sure to say, do you mind if I just get one, Mr. Bruno Mars with you, or whoever the artist is? And I still do that today. For example, here's a really good example of event photography to me. So this is Toyota Arena in Ontario, where I'm the house photographer. And the guy in the tie is the general manager. Every show, I have to go take a trade shot, they call it, of the artist with the general manager, and the young lady on the right is the booking manager. This show was Snoop Dogg. The guy on the left wasn't part of the show, but he's well known in that world. So when I went back to take this particular photo, as part of the thinking quickly, we go back in, you can kind of see behind them, there's a black couch. And I walked in and somebody said to me, where would you like to take the photo at? And I'm like, well, it's pitch dark in that corner. The kitchen over there in the dressing room has some light. Let me go over there and kind of look. I go over there in the kitchen to look, and a rather large security guy comes over to me and says, and I quote, "You know he's not going to move, right?" At which point it's like, okay, we'll photograph it over by the couch. I go over there and I see the guy on the left sitting there. The guy on the left is Warren G. Wasn't supposed to be in the shot, but I had the wherewithal to realize this is a famous guy too. They're going to take this picture and circulate it to Polestar and other venue trade magazines. You know, Warren, would you like to be in the shot as well? Sure. He jumps up, takes the shot. That's event photography, is just kind of living on the edge and thinking quickly as you go. And these type of things for me happen all the time. This is a country artist. They didn't have a place set up. We ended up photographing next to the bus. That's kind of the definition of event photography.
Right, right. And we're going to get into some of the equipment and things, but what's really important, I think, for any of us, even those of us that have been doing it for a long time, is constantly make sure that you are familiar with, one, the location that you're shooting at. Like if you get a chance to scout, but also your gear. Like you've got to be able to make changes or fix things quickly when your gear fails. You know, it's not if it fails, right? It's when it's going to happen. So that sort of leads into the next topic is, does the gear that you have matter in event photography? And I'll just kind of lead with this, Steve, a little bit. Is in the wedding world, I don't have a lot of people running around as you might have, let's say, if you're shooting motorsports or you're shooting team sports, but I shoot in a lot of really low light. So for me, it matters to me that my gear can grab focus in low light. Can you shoot events with any gear? Absolutely. But I think that there are some pieces of gear that can really make a difference when you're photographing. For example, like photographing concerts with Steve, understanding how your focus works, and a lens that is a fast lens, like a low light lens, can really help, so you can gather as much light as possible. That's really important. Steve, what kind of gear do you see using there?
So everything you said is so spot on, and I can't stress it enough. When you're doing event photography, if you are thinking about your gear, you're gonna miss a shot. It's not if, it's not when. It could be like Troy mentioned, if your gear breaks. I was in a photo pit photographing Slipknot for the first time ever. I was super excited. I get to photograph Slipknot. I had a 5D Mark III with a 24-105 f4 on. I literally shot 2 shots and then the camera went black. And I look on the back and there's an error code. And I disconnected the lens, put it back on, held it up. It worked fine, kept shooting, failed again. The key was, and I think Troy would agree with this when it comes to weddings, the key to me, at least, was, because we only get 3 songs. At this point, a song and a half has gone by. Remaining calm and trying to just figure out really honestly what's going wrong was key to me, because what I realized was, as long as I stayed at 24 millimeters, my camera worked. It was zooming in. There was a part broken in the lens, and anytime you zoomed in, the aperture was gone. So yeah, staying calm and solving that issue, coming up with that, is key. Beyond that, understanding your gear. If you are, here's a good example of understanding your gear. If I was thinking about my gear with this shot, I would have missed that jump, right? I wouldn't, if I was thinking about my focus points, if I was thinking about how to get focus, this was shot with an R5, by the way, I would not have been able to get this person, the guitarist and singer of Coheed and Cambria, in the air. Another really good example actually was this one. I carry 2 camera bodies on, and it's for this reason. My left hip, when I was doing this, I'm mirrorless now, my left hip was a 5D Mark III with a fisheye or a 16-35 on it. My right hip was either a 24-70 or 70-200. The reason is, when a singer or a guitarist jumps in your face, which they will, I could very quickly drop one camera, grab the wide angle, snap the shot. If I'm thinking at that point without doing it mindlessly, if I'm adjusting my exposure, worrying about focus points, Paul Stanley's gone at that point. So you've got to be able to literally just hit the ground running at any time.
Yep. So what does your kit look like? What do you consider to be your minimum and maximum equipment that you need for an event?
I'll start with the minimum. So, and then I'll work my way up. For years, I only shot with a 5D Mark III and a 5D Mark IV. I always carry two bodies. A, it's a backup in case one of them breaks. And B, it's the ability to have that wide angle in case something happens right in front of me quick. But there are exceptions to that. So literally just last weekend, I was at the arena. We're standing out front taking pictures of people lining up for a very, very popular Mexican band. They sold out 3 nights at Staples Center and 3 nights at Toyota Arena. And they wanted to put on social media right then, hey, the line is forming type thing. If I took it with my camera, I'd have to go back into the admin offices, offload it onto the laptop, process it, airdrop it to their phone. Instead, I used my iPhone 13 Pro Max. Took a picture, did the exact same thing with a drink. They wanted this a special drink they do. Shooting this otherwise would have taken forever. So my bare minimum is whatever I can do to turn it around for the client as quick as I need it. Right now, in fact, I'm selling my 5D Mark III. I'm using the 5D Mark IV for my webcam. Right now, I'm shooting an R6 is on my left hip with the wide angle at all times, and an R5 is on my right hip with either the 24-70 or the 70-200. The one other lens I still own, 15-35 is what's usually on the left hip, or a fisheye. The one other lens I use very regularly is a 150-600 Sigma. And that lens is invaluable to me, but I will say my R6 is 20 megapixels. My R5 is 45 megapixels. Thinking about that when you position your lenses. So if I'm shooting soundboard at a concert from really, really far away, I will put the 150-600 on the 20 megapixel body because I won't need to crop it. I've got 600 millimeters and I can zoom in. I can actually shoot with the 70-200 on the R5 and crop the heck out of it with no problem. So just positioning your lenses where you need them matters. You're muted.
Being able to crop if you need to crop. Like I shoot with the Z6 Mark II and the Nikon Z7 Mark II. The Z6 Mark II is more than enough, and I can tell you that again, like any piece of equipment will work, but just understanding that there are certain things within a piece of equipment that will make it better for certain types of events. So the more modern cameras focus better in low light and softer light, not just low light, but like soft contrasty light. Even the mirrorless struggle more with focusing than do the DSLRs. So like my D5 was a DSLR, would focus almost instantaneously and fire in pretty flat light. The mirrorless still kind of struggle with that, but knowing what that piece of equipment can do for you, right, and if that shot matters, then look at what that gear is. And I say it that way because I don't want to promote certain types of gear or have people think that, oh gosh, like to do events, you got to be able to shoot 15 frames a second, and like no. But just be aware that a certain piece of equipment, like a fast piece of glass, like a 24 millimeter 1.4, that can do a lot for you in low light, like at a concert situation, right? On any piece of equipment. So, when it comes to equipment, I try to read my manual every year, regardless of how long I've been shooting. I've been shooting for 30 years and I know my gear pretty well, but I still make it a habit to go through the manual just to make sure, like, oh God, there's a feature. I didn't use that recently. I forgot. So definitely play with your gear, I think, for any type of photography, but event, because things happen so fast that you have to be able to react kind of in the dark,
Well,
so,
and again, I'm going to add, using your gear is absolutely key. Like when I mentioned first
right,
of all, what Troy said, my R5 and R6 focus so scary fast, but there was a trick I learned from David Bergman. He did an Ask David Bergman actually on it. I'll tell you about in a minute. When I talk about photographing from the soundboard, if you look right here, see if I get it in the right spot. I missed it. It's more down here. That's the soundboard. The stage is over here. Right there. So if you're shooting from far away, just having the right gear can matter. But what Troy was saying about focusing is so critical, because in this particular case, I was actually looking at the guitarist that was on the stage. This has nothing to do with my gear. I just kept both eyes open. And I happened to notice if my left eye was closed as I was looking through the viewfinder, I'd still be photographing the guitarist. Instead, my left eye was open and I saw the lead singer climb all the way up on the speakers to jump off. But by the time I got it, he was already up there. So being able to turn and have gear that focused at the speed that I needed it to for what I shoot, which is screamingly fast, I was able to turn, focus, grab the shot really fast. That to me is how you know when to upgrade your gear, is when you're shooting and you hit the limit of your gear. And I will tell you the focus trick that David Bergman showed me really quick. And that is on the back of an R5, I use back button focus, the AF on button on the back. And that is set to a normal focus point. I happen to use on a Canon, they have what they call focus assist. So it's a center point with 8 points around it that if the center point loses it, one of those 8 will pick up the slack and try and help. That's under my thumb, under the AF on button. The asterisk button on almost all cameras is like, what is it, focus lock or FEL or whatever it is. Nobody that I know of uses it. Nobody that I've met uses it. So what he did was he reprogrammed that button to do autofocus. And what people don't notice in the menu, and this goes to exactly what Troy said, read your menu now and then, is when you go reprogram the button on the back of the R5, there's a little thing down there that says push the info button for details. And if you push the info button for details, you can say, when I hit the asterisk button, I want you to also change my focus mode to eye and face detection. So now for me, my normal focus button is a focus point. I move around the screen where I want it, because a lot of time hair's moving, I can't get an eye. But if I can, I just move my thumb to the asterisk button, hold that down, and I've got eye and face detection. Yep. Knowing your gear matters.
Yeah, and you can do that too with the Nikon. So it takes time, and a lot of stuff that you'll find on the web, as Dwayne mentioned, he said with mirrorless, knowing focus modes is huge. So much on the net, yeah, or about the net is on the net about focus mode is wrong. And so, you know, go look at some good videos, try to figure that stuff out. But really, you need to figure it out on your camera so that you can go and do really well. And Steve had me go shoot a concert with him. We photographed the band's Warped Tour, and the very first time that we went, it was really frustrating for me because I had to learn, you know, where people were on stage. But the one thing that was not hard for me was my gear. I could grab any shot at any point because I could grab my gear. Yeah, that was that year.
That was it. That was the year. That's Troy and the little guy next to us. That it was like 110, and we were dying, and he fell asleep.
So Steve, let's jump ahead a little bit into sort of capturing the story, telling the story that we can get out of an event. You know, for me, and I'm gonna share my screen really quick for this one. Wait, I'll let you do it first because apparently I closed that window.
Go ahead. Well, no, you get your screen open, and I'll talk and stall for you.
I got to get back.
Yeah, you go ahead. So let me talk and stall until he's ready. And I'm actually going to go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say what happened was I was fully prepared to do all this stuff from home, but you know, I'm on the road, so everything is in a different place. So here we go. All right, so let me go ahead.
On something like you should know your gear better.
Yeah.
You know what? This is true.
Hold on. He missed the shot. Look, he missed the shot. Shoot.
Thanks for that, Dwayne. That was very kind of you. So, you know, obviously I shoot weddings. And one of the things that happens a lot for me, and I know that John Goolsby recognizes this location, is, so do I. You know, telling a story and capturing that moment, right? Oops, it's going the wrong way. So this I didn't set up. this is one of those kind of things, kind of like Steve's concert shot, where I'm standing out in the street getting ready to do all the girls, and her shoes are laying over there on the left. And this little ring bearer, I think it's like her nephew, said, hey, he sat down and he's helping her. He's holding her shoe. And so I just lift the camera and shot. And knowing that my camera was roughly in a proper setting, compositionally, I knew what lens I had on in my camera. I made some changes to the exposure compensation before I even lifted it to my face and took the photo. And then I took the photo, and then you have to move on. So for me, a lot of the event stuff, moments like this, are very spontaneous. But most importantly, it's not just capturing something happening, it's actually telling a story. And so watching what's going on around you, even when you're photographing one thing, this might be happening somewhere else. If it's not interesting, maybe you ignore it. But if it's telling a story, you can't ignore it. Like you have to grab it. So I'm all about telling the story. I think we all are kind of about telling the story. This particularly for me is that's that capturing the moment, right? It's like the timing, seeing it happen as opposed to just holding the button down and hoping that the event happens within that burst. Right,
Yeah,
Stephen, would you?
I completely agree with that. And part of doing exactly what Troy just said is that slowing your brain down. If you're thinking, chasing, looking, you're going to miss it because you're not, there's an old saying in martial arts, you move faster when you're relaxed, right? So in that particular case, the more relaxed you are, the more calm you are, the more you're going to be aware of your surroundings and be able to do what it is that you need to do quickly should something happen. And I gave the example earlier of having a second eye open. It's that type of a thing. To me, capturing that special moment and telling the story are kind of the same thing. So this is a Muay Thai fight. And I don't know how much of this is going to come through Zoom. I'm hoping that it does. But part of it here is I had access to stand next to the ring. Everybody else you'll see in the far back, everybody else is way, way, way down on the ground, right? But if you look at this, it's a moment. This guy is being counted out. He got knocked down. He's getting a countdown. You see the ref is holding up 2 fingers. But in doing this, I've got perspective working for me. The guy in front of the camera that's being counted down looks humongous. The fighter on the other side is the guy who knocked him down looks smaller simply because of perspective. Actually, he was way smaller too. He's pacing like, come on, bring it on. I want to keep going. And I don't know if you can see it. Let me do this. See if I can zoom in. I don't think it's going to change that. Darn. If you look in the bottom left corner, you'll kind of see his cornerman, meaning the guy pacing in the back, David. They're all doing this, right? They're like, count him out, count him out. There's a little bit of a story there. And sometimes the stories are really, really obvious. Sometimes they're not. If you look at this fight photo, any idea who won the fight?
No, I mean, you're gonna think that it's the guy not bleeding.
Actually, the guy
right?
not bleeding is the guy who won. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And if you and there's a couple of interesting small tells here. The guy that's taller that won has his hand on his head, which is almost a meaning, but it's not. It's comforting here. He's looking down on the other guy. The other guy isn't looking him in the eye. He's looking down at his chest. He's all bleeding. There are ways to tell stories.
He can't see straight anymore.
Can't raise his head up. This one, on the other hand, was not an obvious story to most people. But that is Howard Leese in the background. He was the original guitarist for Heart. He plays for Paul Rodgers of Bad Company fame now. He's a rock and roll Hall of Famer. He brought his son out on stage. He's watching his son play guitar on stage. Sometimes, this is one Troy actually loves right here. Sometimes things happen and you've just got to be completely ready. Sometimes you won't get it. Smashing Pumpkins, soundboard shoot. Billy's kid comes out with headphones on. Right? Now, what was funny was I didn't see it. And somebody said to me, oh my God, his kid's on stage. And I'm like, what? I missed it, except it ended out I was focusing on and saw Billy and photographing Billy here and happened to get the kid.
Nice.
So sometimes
Nice.
when you're looking at stories, it's the little things. It's Corey Taylor standing in the rain with his hands up like, look, it's raining. This is the guy that was in that meet and greet photo earlier. Warren G is famous for smoking weed on stage. So the story for Warren G is the giant blunt that he's smoking. That to me is telling the story and capturing the moment. You gotta know it when you see it.
So to jump a little bit more techie now, and I'm bouncing around in our list quite a bit because I feel like we're not going to have time to get through it anyway. Tell me just in general, and let's share how we both set up our cameras, because I think we shoot quite differently the way that we set up our cameras. So without going into extreme detail, yeah. Technically he doesn't shoot right, he shoots left, but we'll talk about that.
That's true, yeah.
No, but I mean, like, do you use manual? Do you, what kind of, because you shoot Canon, right? So
Yes.
like, what are your autofocus modes and why are you picking those and why do they work for you? And then I'll explain the better way to do it and why it works for me.
I look forward to that. So yes, I'm a Canon shooter. As I mentioned earlier, I now shoot an R5 and an R6. My focus modes did not change a lot for that. So generally, I know a lot of people who shoot center focus point always. I do not. The way my mind works, I think in composition. I see scenes in composition. I look at a scene, I look at a singer, and I think, is his head in a clean spot? Where's the lighting? How can I use that lighting in conjunction with my composition in camera? So I will generally move my focus point, and they tend to ride a little up towards the top and either over on this rule of third or this rule of third, and I move them back and forth generally. It varies. I tend to use on Canon focus point assist, which is the one I mentioned earlier. It's a single point. People misunderstand when they see 9 points lit up. Focus point assist is a single point where the 8 around it will help if needed, but it's really one focus point. One key part for me is concert photography is really helped if you can use spot metering, which you can do on almost every upper level Nikon body on Earth. Canon bodies, the only Canon body that does what I would need for spot metering is the 1D series. I'm not sure if the R3 does. I'm going to ask Jeff Cable when I get him on my podcast in a week, because he used the R3 at the Olympics in Tokyo. But on any body other than like an R5, a 5D Mark IV, if you're in spot metering, your spot that it meters off of is always in the center. If you move your focus point up and to the right, you're focusing here, this could be a spotlight lit singer's face. And dead center could be a pure black piece of stage, and it would meter off the pure black. So in that sense, spot metering is not useful to me on the bodies that I shoot. I use, Canon has case modes. I always used case 4 for the autofocus mode, which is almost like a preset of settings. Nikon has similar settings. Canon has them, you can go to the settings or you can have presets. Case 4 was for erratic movement. And basically what it is if a subject comes between you and the subject that you're focusing, how fast do you want it to switch? Things like that. I always use case 4. I use auto now for the cases on the R5. Works really, really well. Manual mode, I do everything in manual. I do back button focus. Helps a lot.
So we're going to talk manual mode. When you say
again?
manual mode, when you say manual mode, you're meaning that's your exposure setting. So you're changing your shutter speed and aperture.
Yep. And ISO. I do know, modern cameras now on almost every brand, you can be in a manual mode, but auto ISO, and then use exposure compensation for the ISO or have presettings for how high the ISO can go. I know people who do that. I don't. I shoot everything fully manual. I think that's about it. Did I miss anything?
No, that makes sense. I think the biggest.
And by the way, I should add, I don't use lighting. We're not allowed to use flash in live music photography. So.
Right. I think really for me, the difference would be, well, so for me, I shoot everything in aperture priority. And the reason that I do that is I never know what's going to happen in the scene around me. And I don't want to be shooting at the bride and groom, maybe at the altar, and have an exposure setting and
Did
then
you
look to my left.
spotlight me? Because you're not switching on right
I don't think so. Remove spotlight. Yep, I didn't see that up there, so that's
now. There
okay.
we go.
Yeah, so I shoot in aperture priority because one of the things that I don't want to do is I don't want to forget, like I'm shooting up at the altar and something happens over here. I just want to turn and shoot. So for me, aperture priority is really good because it gives me a range of proper exposure because it's going to adjust my shutter speed. Now that's important for me because shutter speed doesn't matter as much as aperture. If you're shooting motorsports or something else, then you may want to look at like shutter speed priority, or you shoot manual mode like what Steve's doing. But I shoot aperture priority and I adjust my ISO to get me into the shutter speed range and the aperture range that gives me a proper exposure. So I'm
So
looking
you do
for
that to prevent your shutter from dropping too low, basically.
Right. And basically just me being in a busy moment and brain farting and turning around and shooting a shot that's, 10 stops overexposed or underexposed because I didn't take it.
So let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question while you're doing that then. You're an aperture priority, you adjust your ISO to make sure that at whatever aperture you choose, you don't end up at 1/6 of a second.
Mm-hmm.
What do you consider with what you shoot the slowest shutter speed you would find acceptable?
60th of a second.
Okay.
Unless I manually push it below that on purpose, but I keep it at a 60th because that's also really good for like flash sync, minimum flash sync and things like that. I also set my white balance at 5200 Kelvin fixed all the time. And the reason that I do that as well is because I don't want, one, if I change the Kelvin temperature, I'm going to screw it up and I'm going to forget and I'm going to have wacky colors anyway. But what I do is about 5,000, 5,200 Kelvin is about a 0 point for me. Incandescent light's a little warm, but shadow light outside is just a little blue. And what it does is it gives me a constant. So when I'm shooting a scene, maybe I'm doing like romantic scenics and I'm outside, everything out there is the same color. Now, the auto white balance is actually pretty damn good. So don't discount the auto anything on our new cameras. Auto ISO, auto white balance, they're really good. But I don't want the variance when I'm editing like a family session and I've got like 20 different images coming up with the family and it's changing, the color's changing slightly from, somebody comes up in a red dress and somebody comes up in a green dress and whatever. So I like to fix that.
And so that I do shoot auto white balance.
Yeah. So the other thing that's different, and I don't know about the other camera manufacturers, so you'll have to check this for yourself, but it is important, is that on a Nikon, the metering follows your focus bracket wherever you put it in the frame, and it's always done that, even on the lower end cameras. And if you don't realize, like what Steve has says, and I think he discovered this a few years ago, it's really frustrating if you think you're metering where your bracket is and it's metering dead center. So again, that's the manual thing, right? Like reading that manual. But the Nikon, I do the same thing. It's called evaluative metering. So it's kind of or matrix metering. So it's the whole scene. And then I do a focus point that has like, I don't know what it is, like 9 points around it. Like, I don't know. So it tracks the focus pretty well. So that would be my settings. And I feel really comfortable with those that I can grab a bird in flight if I need to. I'm pretty comfortable with it. I know Steve can do the same thing. So, and I've had friends that I've shot concerts. I've shot NHRA drags. He shoots everything in manual and he's fast. He's as faster than me. So whatever it is that you do, lean into it and you're the best at that, but just realize that you do have some other tools in there. So
I'm gonna add something to this that I just thought of because this did bite me when I bought the new gear. So on Canons, using a single focus point, I don't use zones because in my particular case, zones will bite me. When hair flies out here, sometimes the zone will catch the hair, whereas I can keep a single point on an eye. But one of the things that bit me was on the R5, by default, you move the focus point around the screen with the joystick that's on the back. I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. No, it wasn't for me. Not only was it not awesome, it made me miss shots because I'd put my thumb on it and I'd start moving it from like down here to up here, and I'd make it about this far, and I'd accidentally push in on it. When you push in on it, that centers
It
it.
resets it.
So sometimes I would get it like I'd start way down here and I'd get way up to the corner, almost where I'll move it over, click, boom, jumps to the middle. So I reset it to do the dials, and I'm super fast with this one goes left, right. This one goes up, down. I'm done.
I'll also add that if you haven't moved into a mirrorless camera with the face tracking, the face recognition, and the eye autofocus, you're missing out. I mean, Steve finally upgraded.
Yeah.
And I know, look, as I've been shooting weddings for 30 years, that's all I've done is a wedding photographer, and I've shot DSLRs up until like 2 years ago when the Z6 came out, and I was like, how good can these things be? Look, don't go sell all your gear right now, but go play with them. The face and eye autofocus, for me, it works brilliantly in very specific situations. Now, the Nikon has a benefit where you can actually move a larger segment around in the frame, and then it hunts for faces and eyes in there as opposed to the whole screen. But the benefit to me is that I don't have to look through the camera. So if I'm photographing some kids, or like I'm photographing a wedding, I've got a ring bearer and she's being really cute, or a flower girl or ring bearer and they're being really cute, I can just put the camera in their face and I know it's going to grab their face. Now that's new for me. I know that videographers have had some of that for quite a long time. I know that like Panasonic and the Lumix systems have had that for a long time, but it's pretty cool. Steve, is that doing any good for you? Like in your concerts, is it able to grab faces?
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the most amazing things. Is I was shocked that from the soundboard at 600 millimeters, the problem is a lot of times people are just still small, and getting a focus point on an eye was tough. You know, maybe I'd get their head, but in post, they wouldn't be as sharp as you wanted. I can get face and eye focus from the soundboard at 600 millimeters.
Right.
And again,
Right.
one of the advantages to me, which happened to me the other day, is if somebody is right in front of me, if I'm in a photo pit right next to the stage, I was photographing Angels and Airwaves with Tom DeLonge of Blink 182 fame. He had a hat on like this. And if I was at the right angle from the side, the eye autofocus would get him and it was great. But if the lighting changed even just a little bit and that shadow came down, suddenly it would do this and get this, his whole face. Well, the problem with that is at 2.8, from where I'm standing off on his side, what that meant when I would see the box around his ear would be in focus and his eye wouldn't.
Yeah.
So switching, that's where using those two buttons for me, I can quickly switch and go, nope, I want a focus point now.
Yeah, and that's learning your gear. So that kind of goes back to that. Let's talk a little bit about managing people, managing the scenarios, and let's start off with asking.
But before you do, can we do one thing?
Yeah.
We talked about capturing the moment, but I want to dive into that just a little bit, because when we were talking about moments, it's important to understand, and Troy does this so well. If you go look at his portfolio, there are big moments and there are small moments, and almost what you would call environmental versus detail, right? Being able to see something happening in a scene as opposed to something that, for lack of a better phrase, is more intimate. And the example I'll use was the one that Troy showed earlier of the bride sitting down with the kid on the ground. That's one of those small moments, right? Throwing a groomsman up in the air is more the big moment. And one of the things I find most photographers have trouble with is understanding the small moments. Sometimes you don't know that they're going to happen. So for this particular shot, where'd it go? Whoop, there it is. For this particular shot, the lead singer turned around and I wasn't sure who he was grinning at. And then he did that and hugged his guitarist. So, you know, this is another good one, and you won't be able to really see it here.
And let me interrupt you on that, Steve, because go back to that other image that you showed where the lead singer's hugging him. So with event photography, one of the biggest challenges for somebody who's new, okay, is that when you see this kind of thing happen, you get tunnel vision.
Yep.
But you can't do that. You have to, you're constantly heads on a swivel. You have to constantly watch the scene environment around you, because you've got that shot. Now you're looking for the next shot. Don't get hung up on that, right? Don't sit there for too long, because there is so much happening, and you'll miss the whole event. Don't dwell on that.
And here's another good example of the weird small moment. They wanted pictures of the VIP club. Okay, well, there was nobody in the VIP club. If I give you pictures of the VIP club, which they want for marketing, it's an empty room. Now here, the shadows are coming out a little muddy over Zoom, but it's an empty room. But these people were taking a selfie. That's the marketing, is they're enjoying themselves in the room, whether it's empty or not. And this is an example of more the environmental. And again, you won't be able to see it here probably over Zoom, but if you look dead center, there is a small white line. That's the guitar pick he's throwing to the people trying to catch it. So I just wanted to touch on, when you're talking about moments, that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean every shot has to be this, right? Jumping in the air, hair flying. Sometimes it's the little things that you're looking for, but the problem is you've got to look for those. Anyway, so you were going to go into something else, Drew.
Well, right, and I'm glad that you segued into that, because that's a really good point. Because I think that the thing about event photography, or photographing something like that, as opposed to like doing a portrait session in a studio where you have a controlled environment and everything is kind of moving linearly for you through the shoot. Events, everything is going global and going all different directions simultaneously. And while you're focused on your subject, you've got to have 20% of your attention looking around you. I'm photographing the bride and I'm looking over at Dad. I see Dad walk in, with a tray of drinks. Now, what's Dad going to do? But I'm still setting up my shot. Okay, so, you come over here and trying to figure out like what's going to happen next. And you've got to constantly watch for that. With that, and I don't know why, hey guys, is it still focused just on Steve, or is it switching?
No, it's switching.
Okay, I'm not kidding.
I mean, it's not as attractive, but it is, it is definitely,
I think my beanie's better.
Switching. No, go ahead. You were going to do a different category. Sorry.
While you're photographing, whether you're photographing somebody up on stage and you're seeing that kind of thing happen, you've got, and Steve, you can, if you can bring it up, that shot of everybody that's in the pit. You've got to deal with all those people. And at the weddings, I have to deal with all the families that's gathered around me. And I have to deal with other vendors. And that's super challenging, right? Like you've got to find your way up to stage, Steve. You've got to deal with somebody who's being pushy or maybe being rude and not following protocol. I've got to deal with, the other vendors, which leads me to John Goolsby's question, which for those of you that don't know, John Goolsby is a amazing videographer, Godfather Films, and he's been photographing he was a videographer probably before I picked up a camera. So John,
he was a videographer. I actually know this because when I DJ'd weddings, I worked a couple jobs with John. He was a videographer before you owned a beanie.
That's probably true, because when him and I started working together, I still had hair. So John asked, what are some things videographers can do to be a better team player? And I think it's fair for us all to think of that, whatever our job is. But I think that the thing that we can do, and I know, John, that you already do this, so that's kind of a loaded question, is we cooperate. Is we're all there to do a job. Like in our case, for doing weddings, we all work for the bride. So our goal is to get the bride whatever she needs. So I want to help the videographer, and the videographer should want to help me. For the ones that don't, I have a small ice pick that I stick in their calf. And that usually gets them out of my way. Steve, for you, for your events, you might be working for the theater itself, for the amphitheater, or for the artist. And so you've got to work with other photographers and organizers and coordinators that may put you in places that you want to be. So I think the key word here is cooperative, right? Be
I'm going to
cooperative.
call it etiquette. So one of the things, at least in what I shoot, we have something we commonly refer to as pit etiquette. The photo pit that we shoot in, the wedding that Troy shoots at, the social party you're photographing for a magazine, these are, from our point of view as photographers, these are professional work environments. If there's more than one person that's doing the job, as an example, videographers, whatever, photographers, understanding that there are other professionals trying to do their job that have just as much right to be there as you. It doesn't matter. I see people in my industry complain, like most people are not allowed in a photo pit with a phone, and we frown on that generally. But I see people complain that somebody's in there with a Canon XTI or T6 or something like that entry-level camera and an 18-55 kit lens. But they don't complain about the person with a Leica and a fixed 50 millimeter because money, I guess. If somebody is in that work environment and doing the job, they have just as much right to be there doing it as you, and you have to respect each other. So in my world, that means don't do this with your camera over your head because you're sticking it into somebody else's shot every time. I literally at a show the other day, there was somebody, they came in the photo pit wearing bright orange, which is a no-no. We wear stage black. And they kept holding their camera up like that. And I finally reached over their shoulder and pushed the camera down because I needed to get the shot, and you're in the shot. I've had videographers do that. And I've seen photographers do that to videographers where the videographer is clearly photographing and panning and getting a shot and getting motion. And the photographer just walks right in front of them. Do a simple thing. Duck down.
Or you walk up to the videographer and start talking to them and
Yes.
not realize they're recording video.
Right. You've got to be aware of what other people's roles are and respect those roles regardless. And I'll give you an example of a videographer. When I'm at an arena and there's a videographer in the pit with his camera either on his shoulder because it's a $100,000, ARRI, or it's on a tripod and there's cords running everywhere and he's trying to move around, he gets first dibs on any spot because he's actually videoing for the big screens that they're showing to the audience. He's not a wedding videographer that's going to edit it later. Understanding the other workers' roles is key.
Yeah. And if you're a photographer and you don't shoot video, talk to your videographer at the event when time is appropriate and make friends. I think that's one of the most important things. I mean, early on when I started, I met John, and John gave me a lot of very blunt advice about where to be, as John does. And we love you for that, John. But it helped me to understand the challenges that a videographer has, which makes the next wedding for me work a little bit better because I go up to the videographer and I'm like, hey, here's how I work. What can I do for you?
I'm sorry,
And
I
if he
was in a
doesn't,
wedding with you,
then
and
the
that's
ice
not
pick
what you
comes
did.
out. If
I was going to say, you went up to him and said, hey, butthead, it's my wedding.
I try not to. Yeah, I'm getting better. I'm getting better. With age comes maybe patience and whatnot.
So there's one. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say. I mean, we're at an hour, and we don't necessarily have to wrap up. And I would love to hear from you guys, that are in the group hanging out. What are some of your challenges? Let's ping Steve and I, talk to one another. You want to ask a videographer questions? We got John right there.
Well,
John's happy
and
to
I
do
would
that.
say I want to share one thing really quick here. But Dwayne has been putting phenomenal advice in the chat, and I said to him, you need to be saying that on the show. And he's afraid to step in and step on people. But Dwayne, you need to be saying these before
If
you
you
do.
want to
There's
invite me, I'll do it.
Oh no, you got to be in here, and you're going to be here next month anyway.
Yeah.
But there's one area of event photography before we finish and go too open and down a different road I do want to touch on, and that is, and I think Troy will agree with this, and that is the chaos of it. There will be events that you will be at that everything will hit the fan. Like stuff will happen that will make your head spin. You're not going to get the shot. that's okay, right? Number one, you may miss it. That's okay. It doesn't mean you can't still tell the story though. So as an example, I had no idea what was happening when the guy without a shirt on, who's Jason, he's the lead singer of this band, jumped off the stage and started pushing crowd surfers up onto the stage. Couldn't make sure I got focus proper. Instead, because he was moving so quick, and to give you an idea, I think this might have been 10,000 ISO in a 60th of a second or something stupid. But Jose, who's the guy who was sleeping in that one shot, was on the other side. I had the wherewithal to I needed a focus point. I needed an anchor in the shot. Didn't have to be Jason. In fact, in some ways, it's better that it's not. But I got a crowd surfer in the back, and I got all of him, including the head. I got the blur of the backpack and Jason, the nightmare that security is having. Chaos will happen. Like I said, don't hold your camera up. Don't hold your camera up. Never hold your camera up. But when you turn around and the guitarist jumps in the crowd and everybody's camera goes up, you have two options. You can either do what most of them are doing, which is try and stick your camera out there to get just the guitarist, or think outside the box and go, you know what? The chaos is the story. Back up and photograph the chaos that's happening in front of you, right? It could be, this. Again, somebody holding a camera up. Now,
Also,
all I did was crop that out, change the exposure. That shot worked fine.
also keep in mind, and events are very unique in this, is that there's probably somebody behind you
That's the
that
end result,
wants to see or photograph the same thing that you want to see, right? So for Steve, because I've shot concerts with him, we're in the photo pit. We're not only in front of other photographers, but we're actually in front of the audience that paid to be there to see the act. So if we're blocking the act, that's inconsiderate. If I'm at a wedding and I'm photographing something, there's guests behind me that are there to see the ceremony. Or maybe there's a videographer that's standing in the aisle that wants to get a shot while I'm standing there waiting for something to happen. Like you look behind you, you've got to turn around. So Dwayne, what did you have to say, my friend?
Well, that was a great lead-in. It's not only that you might be blocking the videographer, but you don't know what footage he's got of you doing your job. He doesn't know what images you have of him doing his job, whether you're at an event or at a wedding. So there's going to come a time, if you plan on doing this as a long-time career, where you're going to need somebody to return that favor. So by handing the videographer a cool behind the scenes shot of photographing or filming Blink 182 may get you access 2, 3, 5 years down the road, or start a friendship, which has happened to a couple of us in this room, that gets you into places or gets you help at a time when you need it.
Right.
And
Right,
I don't know about you,
absolutely.
Troy, do you ever go to vendors? I already know the answer to this, but do you ever go to vendors and say, here's some shots of, John, I happen to get some shots of you doing your job that might help you on your website or something?
Yeah, and one of the things that again about events is that you have a lot of vendors there, and that's how predominantly I get a lot of my referrals and my work now, is that I will go to the florist or I'll go to the DJ, and I'll say, hey, I got some really great shots here, just when they're done processed, I'll give them to you, and I create a dialogue. And the facilities, I do the same thing. It's funny, Dwayne, as you were telling that story, it brought to mind, there was a wedding that John and I were shooting together. We were out on, I can't remember where it was, like Menifee Lakes or something. We're on this little dock, little pier thing, is really narrow, and we're photographing, and I turn around and I take a picture of him with my fisheye. And he used that. That was like his promo image for the longest time. And what a joy that is to work with somebody, one, that you enjoy working with, but that's that professional relationship that leads into friendship. And yes, events, there's so many things happening and there's so many people there that have interest. Aside from the gear, aside from all the tech, aside from capturing everything, just be a good human while you're there. Because some of us carry ice picks.
and
Um,
anticipate things. You almost have to be a fortune teller to get some of the shots.
assume nothing.
Yes.
I was walking around on a construction site today, doing some documentary work, photographing a sign, and this guy, old t-shirt, shorts, walks up, looks like he was one of the secondary crewmen. We started chatting about the fact that it was taking 6 hours to hang a sign. Turns out he owns one of the construction companies that's working on the project. 3 images, and we're talking about another job just because you're friendly and polite.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure that John probably has tons of those stories. Anybody that's worked in any industry for any amount of time, you've got to be cooperative, and also you may not realize, you may think the industry is big, that there's so many vendors, nobody talks about you. Oh, that's not the case. Everybody talks about everybody, and the photographer that pissed off the videographer at the last wedding and vice versa, that name gets bounced around, and you'll be at the next facility and they'll be like, oh yeah, we know them.
Oh yes.
It can work for you or against you. So, just be a good human when you're out there doing that.
And you know what? I'm gonna turn this into touring photographers. People who tour with artists, I've had people say to me, I don't know why that band has that photographer. They're not very good. And my response to them is, first of all, they usually are very good. You just don't like them for whatever reason, but not always. Because the most important thing in that scenario is the band doesn't want somebody on their tour bus. They don't want to be living with somebody day in and day out on a tour unless they get along with them. The personality matters way more. It's like, hey, best friend Troy, have you ever used a camera? Well, I used it in high school. Cool. You're the tour photographer, because that's more important than anything else. You'll figure out the photography. I just want to be able to sleep on the bunk above you and not hate life. So the relationships are 80% of anything you do in photography.
Right. So Steve, let's talk a little bit about the business of event photography. You get paid for what you do. I get paid for what I do. There's times to go into a job and do promo work to get noticed. There's times to charge. But aside from that, I mean, how do we set ourselves apart as event photographers, right? As a concert photographer, let's just look at that specifically. How do you set yourself apart from everybody else? That I know that there's tons of people that would love to go shoot the stuff you shoot, and they would gladly do it for free.
Right.
And that's bad for business. So how do you approach that? And for those that are looking to get into doing event photography, and we'll stick again with concerts, how do you get started and not be the low baller that ruins it for everybody?
Get used to charging. It sounds so stupidly simple, but I have had people say to me, well, I photographed this band and they play bars. They don't really have any money. So I gave them the pictures, to which my response is, if that guitarist needed a new pedal, not even needed, wanted a new effects pedal, he's going to buy it, he or she. If they needed a new microphone or a new PA or a new mic cable, that band is going to buy it. People will spend money on things that further their career. So if you're photographing a small, young, broke band or whatever it might be, or nonprofit, and you're photographing their event, even if you just say to them, you know what, I'll do it for $50. What that will do for you is get you in the mindset of charging money. Once you start asking for money, it becomes easier as you go through time. So I'd say no matter what you're doing, concerts or not, charge. The problem in my industry is everybody wants to go photograph Smashing Pumpkins. Everybody wants to photograph Blink-182, Angels and Airwaves, blah, 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 blah. Megadeth. Oh my God, Lamb of God. So so many people will look at a venue and say, oh, I'll shoot for you. I'll do it for free. They're hurting themselves down the road, and they're hurting the industry as a whole in the near term. But what I tell people is do 1%ers. I always call them 1%ers. It's an old thing that a business I worked for did. So when I photograph for the arena, they have me there to photograph things that they can use, that they have in their head when I go photograph whatever it is, things that they can use for marketing that type of event. Like I said before, people, at concessions or something like that. But I will actually go photograph this, the empty arena, so that they can use it to market that. I'll photograph just the backdrop of their VIP meet and greet or the ice when it's not a game. I will photograph things like this that I can utilize for stock photography. And I just licensed this photo for a very strange use. There's a company in LA that a friend of mine works for. Troy knows the friend, Chase. And what this company does is they license stock music to TV shows, and they have playlists online. So by me being at a concert and going, that's kind of cool, and photographing that, I licensed them 6 shots. Okay. The other thing you can do is just kind of set yourself up for success in the sense of think about what you can do that might, and when I say might, get you some money. As an example, I'm at an arena. The sound guy is shooting. I start taking pictures of the soundboard thinking, well, that sound company needs marketing materials. I make sure they see me taking pictures of the soundboard. Sound manager comes over and goes, are you getting any shots of us? I'm like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. Cool, I'll call you to license those. Doing things that put you in the right position. And my best example still is this one, which Troy's heard this before. It's Jason Bonham's Led Zeppelin experience. And the thing about Jason Bonham is I was the house photographer, but I still only got 3 songs, but I had all access because I was the house photographer. I could only shoot 3 songs from the front. So I never took my gear off. I did this for every show. I would go stand in the wings, and I asked permission first, can I shoot? And they said, no, he doesn't want any shots from up here. I went and stood on the side of the stage with 2 cameras and an all access pass. Tour manager comes up to me and goes, what are you doing? Nothing. I have all access. I'm not shooting. I'm not photographing anything. And the response is almost always the same. Why not? Go ahead, get something. So I ended up licensing Jason Bonham's 60 images. Same kind of thing happened with Aaron Lewis here, where it was like, why aren't you shooting? I'm like, I'll shoot if you want me to. Do you mind if I crawl the stage? No, not at all. I go out behind Aaron Lewis. So the answer to Troy's question is, how do you set yourself apart? It's being willing to ask the questions and put yourself in a position for success.
Right. And being a good human. Be nice.
And being a good human.
About
Yeah,
it, right?
I could have abused that. Like I could have screwed this up really bad. Don't be that guy.
This whole idea of it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission is total, utter BS. Because you know what? I'm the photographer that comes in after you trampled the flower bed, and now they won't let me in. Or they're gonna start charging $1,000 for photographers to come into, I don't know, like Kimberly Crest or places like that, because that kind of stuff happens. Be nice. Yeah, don't be the reason for a policy change.
Don't fly the drone over a crowd and then crash it.
Right. And that's terrible. I just saw all that in my head.
It's happened. I've had people, I know a friend, and Troy knows this person, who will walk out on a stage, and on a stage you have silver truss that goes up and across the stage to hold the lights. And he'll walk out there and he'll climb the truss. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm standing on the stage. I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell, man? I mean, there's somebody in OSHA or somebody with the insurance team that's going, please God, don't fall. He gets the shot. And of course, once you get the shot, they love you. But someday something's going to go wrong. And when it does, don't be that guy.
And also think past events. So Joshua, which is low base, who runs a a Twitch channel. So Joshua, feel free to drop that in the chat so people can check you out. But
And real quick,
Joshua,
change your Twitch password, everybody, if you have a Twitch account, because they've been hacked. So change your Twitch password.
But Joshua photographs a lot in zoos and aquarium areas and public places. And although he's not photographing an event, a lot of the same things apply. You know, be kind, be respectful. And you know, if you photograph in a place where they don't allow flash, don't use flash. Get to know the staff. Maybe the staff will grant you permission or grant you special hours, right? Be good to them, and they'll be good to you pretty much in return, right? Joshua, is that if I remember that story, you've actually had that happen to you.
Oh yeah, I've had you know, just from shooting in the same places all the time, and just talking to the staff, asking them questions, being nice, and I'll randomly just bring them prints. I've had keepers open crocodile pens for me. Bribery
works. That's how you get in. But that's great. That's good advice too. Yeah. So don't trespass. Don't get on property you're not supposed to. Be aware of the people around you. Get to know your gear. Everybody upgrade to mirrorless right now this week. Mark, if you're still listening, I think Mark left, but
no, Troy's giving that advice. Stay on the DSLRs and make it easier for Troy and I.
Yes, yeah. And by the way, regardless of if you go mirrorless or not, you don't have to have the best gear. If you're shooting something that's super fast and you're thinking, oh, I need gear that'll focus at, 10,000 ISO, f2.8, get spot on focus at a 60th of a second of somebody jumping in the air. No, you don't. Right?
No, because go look through Steve's portfolio, go look through mine, go look through Joshua's, and just go through it for a little bit. I guarantee you some of your favorite images in there are going to be gear that we used 5, 6, 8 years ago. Gear is great. And again, like we started this thing off and kind of coming full circle, gear is great and it's all amazing, So get out there and use that gear and have
by
fun
the way,
with
also,
whatever you're doing.
If you have to have motion in your shots because your gear isn't fast enough, that's okay. Embrace it. Do something different. Find a way to use a slow shutter speed. Find a way to embrace the motion, and more importantly, shoot for post.
Right.
At events, things that are weird happen. People move out of frame. So shoot so that you can crop.
Right. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this up here, and we'll call it like right at 7:30. John Paul threw a question in here. He says, "How many batteries do you need for those mirrorless to last 4 hours?" John Paul, on the Z6 and the Z7 Mark II, I can shoot an entire wedding on one battery. That's roughly, for me, call it 2,500 images.
Is that with a battery grip or not?
No, that's one single battery.
Yeah. How many shots
now
is
I
that?
do 2,500.
I mean, that's because when I read online, they're all like 300 pictures, 365. And I'm like, that's like no pictures.
Those are standards measurements that by no means are accurate. However, I will tell you, the R5 has 2 settings for the electronic viewfinder: smooth, which is a higher frame rate, and power saving. If I'm on power saving on one battery on my R5, I can get close to 700 shots, whereas on my 5D Mark IV, I'd shoot 1,100.
Oh, okay.
If I go to smooth, I shot 2 bands the other night and I was down to 1 bar. It can go really, now granted that was still 500 shots or something, but it goes a lot faster depending on the settings that you do in the camera too. How often are you using the back viewfinder, LCD screen, chimping, that type of thing.
Yeah. So, John, you know how Margie and I shoot, and how we shoot together, and how active we are with our gear. Margie tends to leave her camera on far more than I do. I turn my camera off when I'm not using it. However, I only change the battery one time during a wedding during the reception, just because it's already down like halfway and I swap the battery out. But sometimes I forget, and I've done a whole wedding. I've done 3 family shoots on one battery. and that's about 600 images per family. And so, you know, I think habit has a lot to do with it. If you're constantly chimping, if you're constantly going through and reviewing photos, if you never turn your camera off when you're moving from location to location, all those things are going to eat more battery. So
the chimping on the new LCDs, I will say, they're so high resolution. The chimping on the new batteries can hurt. Now, I will say one thing that is a little weird with me is my LCD is on auto brightness, which has the downside of sometimes I'm out in bright daylight. It tries to get brighter, or I'll be indoors. Even that can affect it if you're on auto brightness instead of a fixed setting.
Yeah, mine is fixed brighter. So mine's fixed like 2 points brighter. So if that gives you any indication. Dwayne, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, one thing that you didn't mention, Troy, at least with the Nikon, if you're working with the Z6 II and you're using the new ENL 3B, I think it is, the newest version of the Nikon battery, compared to the version that was made for the Z6 or a D800, you're going to get 3 times the life out of it because it's been optimized for the new mirrorless cameras. Do not
same with the
camera. Yeah, that's a good point. Don't think that just any of the batteries for like the D850, the D750, all those will work in your Z cameras, your mirrorless bodies. However, their capacity is garbage. I think it's actually up to a C version now, Dwayne. The newer batteries are phenomenally better at managing the power. They have more power.
And your chargers can matter. Like I bought this really cool dual battery charger. And I was using both my old 5D4 batteries for my R5, and I bought 2 batteries, new batteries, the H version for the R5 and the R6. The battery charger I bought that was double would work with the old ones, but didn't work with the new H version. I had to send it back and get a different one. So all of that matters. Even though they fit in the camera, when they say it's a newer version with higher capacity, even your charger can matter.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. That's helpful because that was the one reason I found today to not go mirrorless. So I'm going to get back to the drawing boards to find another reason.
There are no good reasons, John Paul.
I will tell you, Troy tried to talk me into going mirrorless 2 years ago, and I didn't. I loved my 5D4. It was, money. I came up with every excuse in the book. And finally I went, I'm going to buy an R5 and I'm going to buy an adapter and I'm going to use my existing glass. And my wife looked at me and went, why? Just buy it. I'm like, well, no, you don't understand. An R5, an R6, a 15 to 35, a 24 to 70, a 70 to 200, an adapter so that I can use the 150s. Okay, just buy it. I bought it. Oh my God, man. Like the other thing you're going to notice is if you use native glass for the mirrorless, the flange difference between the sensor and the back element of the glass is shorter because it doesn't have a mirror to flip up. So what that does by changing the flange distance, they change the way they design the elements. So you are sharper to the edges of the picture. There is a pronounced difference you will see in the photos themselves. They're almost more 3D because they are sharp edge to edge.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm trying to sell you.
No, my wife said the same thing. She was like, I think you should get that mirrorless. You should do it. And I was like, I don't know. So that was another reason not to.
And I don't want to keep harping on mirrorless because then it just gets into gear talk. But I've owned every pro body Nikon made since the D1H, the D1 series. I've had the D1H, the D1X, the D1X. I mean, like I've had them all. And every time I'm like, I'm not going to upgrade until it's a really big improvement. And then it's a big improvement. And then mirrorless came along and I was like, I switched to Sony. I use Sony for my infrared. So I had a live viewfinder. I'm like, I'm happy with that. And then, but I didn't like everything else about the cameras. And then Nikon came out with their system. And I was like, well, I'll look at it, but it's going to be garbage. Oh my God. It was another evolutionary leap. And this is somebody, and I'm not tooting my own horn. Steve will do it for me. I'm really good with my gear. Like I can make my gear work for me. And having the live viewfinder, for those who've had the live viewfinder for a while, I know you already knew this. It changes everything. how you can actually see what your images are going to be, what your camera actually sees.
Yep.
It's really kind of a big deal. So, you know,
But again, you
give it a
can
try.
do it with any gear at
Right.
all. Did anybody else have questions? Chime
No,
in, turn your mic on. Let's make it a conversation.
do have a amusing thing on the mirrorless thing. So I just gave one of my
Hold on. Are you in a closet?
Yes, I'm at work,
Okay.
hiding in the closet.
So you
Well,
gave
if
one
I-
of your bodies away.
The bodies.
What now?
Don't ask what he did with the bodies.
Mm. Well, I just gave
Go.
one of my film cameras to a 21-year-old, and her first and only camera was the EOS RP, which is a mirrorless. So she's
Right.
never shot a DSLR. And setting aside the amusement of watching her learn to load the film, she's asking questions about, well, how do I, I'm talking about, underexposing for this situation over, this. She said, well, how do I know? And I'm like, oh my God, she doesn't know how to read a meter.
Yeah.
It never hit me that this person had
Right.
never had to, because she's
that's
only ever
interesting.
shot mirrorless.
Which, I will make the analogy that if you only shoot mirrorless with an electronic viewfinder and that kind of real feedback, which doesn't always work, but generally works. The analogy there of having to go back and shoot with a normal DSLR is analogous to those that have never shot film.
Right.
Right. I mean, I'm
Right.
old enough to have photographed with film, but I was never a photographer in the film days. Those people like Troy and Dwayne and everybody else probably in this room that photographed on film and did darkroom stuff, it's that same type of thing. I think the more basic, we talked about at the beginning, again, we're going full circle, the more basic you are with your gear, the more it will make you a better photographer in the long run.
Yep. So, all right, guys, we're right at 7:30. It's been awesome that you have all hung in here with us. This is, of course, will be recorded and eventually post on the IEPPV YouTube channel, where you guys can watch me and Steve talk to each other as many times as you like. You can go to sleep to it. You can just listen to our voices like in your ears like that. I mean, if you want to do that, you can do that. And if you actually do that, you should let us know, because I think that would be kind of cool. Our next, Steve is not going to be here with us. So this is actually Steve's last show for the year, right? Because the next show is going to end with Dwayne and I and Dennis Dunbar talking about Photoshop and those types of things. And so, Steve, thank you for doing this. It's been amazing.
It's been
Stop
my
playing
pleasure.
with your picture. Stop.
I will be in Hawaii at the time, and nothing personal. I will miss everybody, but I won't. Because after this pandemic, we were supposed to go to Scotland and Ireland last May and didn't get to. And so we're just going to Hawaii and getting away. Can't wait.
Good for you. So, hey, everybody, have an amazing rest of your week. Get out there, take some photos, be good humans, do all the good things. And for those of you that I know and I can see in person, I hope to see you all very soon. With that, good night, and everybody be awesome.
Thank you.